All right, this hangout is on air, and we are joined today by our guest Ben Lathbury and his many cats. But he's a musician, he's a piano player, and he has experience playing the piano and teaching and working with choirs and directing choirs and lots of different things, teaching in schools, performing professionally. And we have Pete with us and also Andrew joining us today. And this is our weekly hangout for MUS 654, which is our open music class, and we're discussing different aspects of musical learning and teaching with the view to eventually create our own curriculum for a student. And this week we're talking about repertoire. So, Pete, do you want to introduce yourself? I know I did, but say a few words about yourself.
Hi, so I'm Pete, I'm a lawyer student, and I play guitar. I go to University of Chichester, and obviously I have an interest in repertoire being a music student because it's my bread and butter sort of thing, so yeah, that's me.
Ben.
Well, I'm Ben, as Laura said. I'm a pianist. I went to the University of Chichester long time ago now, 2006 to 2009 and 2010 my postgrad. I make a living now as a combination of teacher and concert pianist and choir director, and have an odd fascination with repertoire for the piano that isn't normally necessarily played on the piano, and also stuff from computer games, which I may talk a little bit about later on. So yeah, that's me, and I have cats as well who may cameo at some point.
Excellent, Andrew.
Hey, I'm Andrew. I play guitar as well. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. I'm here at the one course. Yeah, not sure what else to say.
That's okay. We'll bring you in as and when. So in our weekly sort of things we're doing, last week there was a really interesting thing that we explored. Well, we asked the basic question: how do you find new repertoire? And I put that question out to various different people, and I told them I'd roll this into our Hangout, so I printed off all the responses that I got. And so I said, how do you find new music to play? What do you do? Because when we ask each other, what do you know, we tend to know what we're taught or what we actually physically have seen or read. And I thought, actually, how do you find new stuff? So somebody said, here we go, here's the responses I got, and see what you three think of this. And of course then, Ben, you can tell us, input more things. So somebody said, talk to people, listening to things that they hear from films or television, other outside sources. They go and they research it and look it up. Somebody said they enjoy sight reading and the challenges it brings. They like to play music that isn't always typical to the ensembles they play in. And because sometimes for example, if you play in a brass band, then they like to go and find something else different. Secondhand bookshops were recommended. Somebody said, listen to lots and just play whatever you like. Don't be bound by what you think you should do. Turning up at concerts where the music is unfamiliar was a good suggestion. Somebody else said, listen to what you love and find out what inspired those people, and then listen to that and take it from there. Somebody else said the YouTube vortex, like look on YouTube and then go down to the comments and see what people say.
Was that Jamie, I think, who said that?
No, it was another. Yes, it was. It was. So, and somebody else said YouTube. Dwayne, who was one of our guests before. Somebody on Twitter said they write their own songs so that they can find new music all the time. So they're finding it because they're making it. And they said some of the things they put on the shelf they never play again. Other things they keep, and some they toss. Somebody else said new music just creeps up and they welcome it, especially if you're playing with other people. So if you're in a band or a music group of any sort, then as long as you know it's up for grabs, you can do more music, then other people can suggest things. Somebody else said, I'm always on the lookout for new transcriptions to learn. Google's fantastic for gathering ideas, also looking through CDs and recommendations from colleagues and other musicians that you know. Somebody else said go through other musicians' music if you get the chance. And And somebody else said buying old books, even if you've never heard of the composer, because then it ends up on a trail of discovery. Talking to people, more concerts, going to clubs that have different music, recommendations, more recommendations. That's pretty much it. There were lots of duplications going on, but those were the ideas that people had, and I thought, actually, it's interesting, because on the day I posted that question, somebody else said, I'm looking for some new cello repertoire. I want something that's by an American composer with an American theme, but I'm having a really hard time finding it. Help, sort of crowdsourcing it.
Mm.
So what is your experience with repertoire and finding it?
Well, it's one of those funny things that repertoire can come from literally anywhere you want it to. My experience always seemed to, certainly all the way through university, seemed to be just stealing it from other people. I'd go to Terry Albright's piano group, and would be there. And I think it was the very first one I went to. There was I think it was Sean Smith, way back when, and he was playing a piece by Liszt, this Sposalizio piece. I thought, oh, that's very pretty. I might learn that. And then the same thing happened later on with the Cacciatore Toccata and various other pieces. And so you hear people playing stuff, and there's so much repertoire that I've nicked from people like Terry Albright and Jonathan Plowright. And I think there's a view that actually you have a teacher who specializes in a certain area, and they may sort of influence you with, in their style and their particular sort of repertoire. Of course, it obviously, it depends what you're preparing a performance for. If you're preparing for a, fairly high-class recital, then you don't necessarily want to go in playing bits of sort of twee, what's the word I'm after? Little sort of bits of incidental music, like Scott Joplin. You wouldn't necessarily go and open up the Royal Albert Hall with The Entertainer. You might do, but so you've got to, consider your audience as well. Likewise, you're not going to go into a primary school and bust out, the Berg Sonata. They're just not going to be interested. So I think it's important to keep your audience in mind whenever you're fathoming repertoire for a particular event. Possibly.
What do you think, Andrew? Do you think you're influenced by teachers as well?
I suppose as a jazzer, as someone who never really was a jazzer, I was very classically minded. I always wanted to play jazz, but as a jazzer, I suppose you sort of come across repertoire that is maybe not strictly written down, and so then you've got the argument about if you're doing an improvisation around a piece, does music have to be notated in order for it to be repertoire, or is it accepted, is it socially acceptable and musically acceptable in certain circumstances to learn stuff by ear? And to improvise in a performance, and of course it is, depending on the setting and again, depending on the event that you're preparing for.
There are a lot of expectations that go with concerts and concert repertoire that are, I don't want to say, well, Liszt made things up, Mozart made things up. Liszt had a fantastic party trick that he would ask for requests from the audience and improvise on the spot. And then we saw there was a piano player called Harry, 5, 6 years ago. Harry the piano.
Okay.
I'm sure you can find him on YouTube, Harry the piano, and he would improvise same sort of thing on a tune. He did fantastically.
You know, like
But
yeah, Game of Thrones in the style of Mozart. You know, you get stuff like that. So, likewise, you can do it in the style of Rachmaninoff, which I'm not going to do. Yeah, and that I was going to make a point there, which is now completely gone. Oh yeah, Mozart. That was because Mozart was obviously one of the first big improvisers. Because obviously you've got like his concerti, which wouldn't have had these whole grand scale cadenzas at the time. They would literally just now make something up. But Mozart, there's a really wonderful anecdote I like about Mozart is that he used to be a supreme improviser. So he would go into like the saloon or the bar and he'd challenge everyone there. This is when he's about 8 years old, and challenge everyone to an improvisation competition. So and it normally maybe around like a bass line, so something like that. And then he'd just sit there and he'd just sort of sit and make stuff up. And then like 5 minutes later he'd come up with something different. And he was sort of, you know, the first great improviser of his day. I think he's always had a sort of special place in my heart for that reason. But yeah, you know, it was acceptable, and indeed it was wanted that you'd sit and you'd make music up effectively on the spot. Yeah,
well, there can be lots of different things. There can be lots of different things that count as repertoire. But saying something about jazz, when you mentioned the idea of music and being written down or not written down, sometimes in jazz you find standards that are the lead sheet doesn't specify what instrument. And I know there are some people who I had a reply from a viola player who said, actually, as a viola player, I looked at other instruments. Well, there is repertoire, but they look to other instruments to widen the scope of what they're doing.
It's the same with double bass players. Everyone nicks Col Nidre for the cello, but it's obviously meant to be played on the double bass.
But it's interesting because on the piano, which has a huge repertoire, there's a tradition of not stealing things, but making four-hands versions of orchestral pieces and quartets and things like that. So, and that, of course, that stems from the time when, to make the music accessible when people had pianos in their homes, everybody played it, and that meant that you had access. It was like your listening library. If you could play it, you could hear it.
So you could sit at home and you could listen to, you know, the 1812 overture in the comfort of your own living room, because obviously before CDs and iTunes were about. John Grave and I, we do quite a few piano duets sometimes. We did Saint-Saëns Danse Macabre, the piano duet, four hands, which was just huge fun, because as a pianist, obviously you normally go in and you're quite a lonely creature, so it's quite fun to actually get to play with somebody else. But, you know, on the subject of arranging music, I think the piano is just so versatile in what it can offer. I mean, I've done an arrangement of the Bach cello suite.
Andrew arranged that for guitar the other day.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, so much of Bach is just so diverse, and it does lend itself to any instrument in a way, especially when you've got those long sort of single lines of stuff. And it just brings something new to music that is, you know, 300 or more years old, and it brings a fresh approach. And you can find new things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do on the cello because it's a cello, like with the sustain pedal, for example. You actually find you actually hear the harmonies in a completely different way. And likewise, if you were to take it to the guitar, you get something different again.
Pete, you were talking earlier to me about the way you arranged a Vivaldi sonata for guitar.
Yeah.
And it had, you, instead of just including the tune, you wrote the harmony in as well. But can you tell us a bit about that process? Because that was really interesting, I thought.
Well, yeah, I took a version of Vivaldi's something or other. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I took the Allegro movement.
E minor sonata.
I basically did the bass part of because it was originally done for two cellos, with one cello doing a melody part and the other doing a bass part. And I essentially found a way to arrange it on the guitar so that it was I could do everything at the same time. which I found incredibly frustrating, but really quite a lot of fun at the same time as well, because it was like massively challenging to just actually figure out logistically how to play it on the guitar, because obviously a cello only has 4 strings. You play with a bow and it's tuned completely differently, whereas a guitar is tuned obviously differently to a cello, and you've got an added 2 strings, so you can do the bass notes on this in the guitar at the same time, but it's not easy, should we say. But I had a lot of fun doing it. Drove me to the point where I was a little bit insane. It was a great exercise, and I would thoroughly recommend it for anybody. Um, Anyone that's not like a complete beginner, anyone who sort of knows a bit about their instrument, whether it's piano or guitar or whatever, to take something like we've been talking about and take it from one instrument and put it on another instrument, because I think it's just great because it shows you how different instruments think, or feel, or how people think around instruments, because everyone tends to have a favorite key, or they tend to play, like saxophonists tend to play sort of quite linearly from my understanding, whereas guitarists tend to, especially rock guitarists, think in sort of boxes and stuff like that. So it's interesting. You get a sort of an insight into another instrument without actually having to think about that instrument. So, and it's good, and it's just fun anyway.
Ben, you've taken repertoire in the past, I know, and made arrangements for, about the process, but also to help teach other things.
Yeah.
So,
it's something I started doing very, very young, when I first got into playing the piano. The stuff I wanted to play, stuff that I enjoyed, stuff that I wanted to play, and to a degree, this is one of the ways of unlocking, making children want to play music, is make them care about it. And so it was my first year at uni, 2006. I transcribed an arrangement of that, which is of the Super Mario Brothers theme, which was huge fun. And actually, I realised when I'd been sort of playing it for a while with sort of seven note chords, and it's quite fast. I thought, no, actually, although it's fun, that as it stands is not going to appeal to somebody who's just starting to play the piano, learning Super Mario. And so you've got to think of different ways around. So you rearrange it so it makes it make a simpler version of it. But tapping into that and actually finding out, well, what do children want to play? Do they want to play Mozart and Beethoven? If they do, great. Just let's all go to IMSLP and download it. Do they want to play Katy Perry Dark Horse? That's a different story. There's not necessarily music easily available for that, but most pop songs, or a lot of pop songs, are fairly simplistic in terms of the tune and the harmonies that go with them. So it's quite straightforward in one regard to put together an arrangement of something that they heard on the radio and say, oh, I really want to learn whatever it is that's number one at the moment, Sam Smith, I think. And you can sort of take it and you can just put it into a way that speaks to them. Think, oh yeah, I can play that song that's on the radio, and all of a sudden they want to come back and they want to go away and practice and they want to go and show their friends. So from a teaching point of view, thinking about repertoire is really important. And repertoire can literally come from anywhere in that respect.
that's not to say that you don't. One wouldn't encourage people to play the classics, as it were.
No, absolutely, and I think there is a time and place for that, and you can sort of drop it in over time, and start out with, depending which direction you want to go. But as a way of getting them in, and then actually progressing them on, it's a nice way to think about opening the door. But I would certainly never discourage anybody from trying to learn a Mozart sonata ever. Well, I might try and put them on a concerto instead.
But the Super Mario Brothers arrangement could very easily be tailored as you wrote it to. Well, you arranged it, not wrote it, but as you arranged it to teach something really, really useful. And it could be like having a chocolate broccoli cupcake, where you get your broccoli, but actually it's a cupcake.
What I found when I arranged it, and I actually had a lad in learning it, who was he wasn't a beginner on the piano, but what I found was actually really hard about that particular piece is that it's not necessarily the notes, it's the rhythm in that piece, because it's all off the beat, and then you get triplets. it's not until you get to when it actually starts to become more four square. But even then, it's not easy. It's not an easy piece rhythmically speaking, and it's in a way you sort of got to working out what the notes are rhythmically, what the lengths of the notes are. Was actually kind of a challenge because from my point of view, I just heard it and thought, oh, that's fun. Let's learn that.
It sounds almost like ragtime to me, like when you break off into the sort of the single note lines.
Yeah, there is an element of that to it. I mean, the left hand is generally sort of masking. I mean, if you played with the ragtime bass, it might be. So you could easily turn it into a study in stride technique.
Yeah.
Also, so if you're learning like. If you want someone to learn a Chopin waltz, but they're not interested in learning a Chopin waltz, but they need to learn a Chopin waltz, then this sort of technique is going to be really helpful. And a piece that's like, oh yeah, I was playing that the other day. That's really fun. I'll learn that. Then it's sort of opening the floodgates for them into that technique, as well as learning some really useful stuff at the same time.
Thumbs up. It's very important from the teaching perspective too. There are a number of different things that you're mentioning. It's about the fun. It's about listening to the student and seeing what do they want to play. But it's also about understanding from your point of view what's behind the music and what's it for. What's it for? That's kind of my question of the week.
I mean, when I first started teaching piano, or I think it was keyboard at the time, one of the big songs was I Got a Feeling by my cat's about to throw the lid down on the piano by the Black Eyed Peas, which actually has got this sort of fairly simple crotchet beat, but actually it's teaching the children actually about hand position, because you've got thumb, second, third, fourth and fifth finger. Actually I could probably just show you here. You've got the hand doesn't actually have to move. And without realizing it necessarily, they're learning all about how it's the importance of putting the fingers in the right place. As soon as you put the left hand with it, I thought, oh yeah, now I know it. And then they're into the tune. Like, yeah, I'm going to learn that because that's really cool. So. All sorts of things that you can find in modern repertoire, but on the same level, modern repertoire and sort of certainly video games has its own value in the same way that we might treat film music now as its own entity in the sort of world of classical music. Video games are also coming into their own. To use a relatively trivial example, the Classic FM Hall of Fame now features more video game music than it ever has done before, because people are starting to recognize that it is its own thing. And there is actually the two pieces of music from video games, one from a game called BioShock 2 and one from a game called The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, that I use in my professional repertoire as encores in recitals. Because if you want to do something, the recital I did a couple of weeks ago, I finished with Rhapsody in Blue, and after that you sort of need a bit of space. So you want to come to something more poignant. So you just finished with this massive chords in B flat, and then you're going in for an encore with. It's a really quite haunting piece of music, but there was no sheet music for it. I actually tweeted at the composer and said, is there any sheet music for this available? And he didn't reply. So I sort of sat down and just listened to it and sort of carved up a pigeon version of it myself. But yeah, it's really important, I think, that you recognize music from places that you wouldn't expect to find decent classical music, or even not classical, and actually expose it and bring it to a fore. And that's kind of what I like to think that I do a little bit when I give performances. I bring stuff that maybe people wouldn't associate with classical music. If you're going to maybe an older audience who don't know what a computer game is, then you're bringing something new, and people say, "Oh, I did like that piece. Where's that from?" It is amazing how many times I get that comment. It's quite nice.
What do you find when teaching younger learners? Do you find there's ever expectations from, oh, I don't know, the parents say that you only teach a certain sort of thing, and how have you had to encourage people that repertoire can be lots of different things?
I mean, I've always marketed myself as a sort of I will teach what you want to learn, with a view to, I think it's important to learn certain staple techniques that you need to learn. And some parents have turned around and said, "Oh, he really likes Star Wars. Is there any chance you could get him playing Star Wars?" And I say, "Absolutely, of course we can." So there's never a sort of an expectation, as long as the parents want to know ultimately that their money's not being wasted and that their child is, in essence, learning something of an instrument and hopefully having a good time as well. Which is why when you get quite prescriptive practice journals and you get teachers who approach and say, "Oh, you haven't done any practice this week," you could turn around and say, "Well, that's the fault of the pupil because they haven't been, they haven't made the time," or you could say it's the fault of the parent who hasn't pushed them enough. But I mean, my view is actually if they haven't gone and practiced, it's because you're not inspiring them as a teacher to want to go and practice. So in that regard, there's arguments for both sides. But ultimately, the parents want to know: am I wasting my money, or are they? If they're not going to become a concert pianist or even take it much further than a couple of terms, are they at least having fun while they're doing it?
Pete and Andrew, do you have a piece that you can remember learning that you really worked hard on, even if it was quite challenging, because you wanted to do it and you chose it?
Yeah, sorry. First, Annie.
Go ahead, Andrew. Yeah, it's a balance of several things. Pete, what did you learn?
Well, there were two different pieces for me. There was the first piece was when I was about 16, and it was the acoustic version of Layla by Eric Clapton, and it took me about 5 days to like learn all the different parts, and then it took me about 2 weeks in total to get it to performance standard. And I just remember for like days and days just playing the solos over and over and over again. And I'd only been playing the guitar for about a year or two at this point. So it was quite a big challenge, but I loved it again. And the other piece was a piece I did last year, and it's called The Tall Fiddler by Tommy Emmanuel. And it's so fast. And that took me about I was a much more advanced player when I tried to tackle Tommy Emmanuel, and it took me about a couple of evenings to get all the different sections, but then months, like literally months and months, to try and get it up to speed. And I've been doing it for about six or 8 months now, and I still haven't got it up to speed. So that's more of a lifetime, I think, to get that kind of piece to perform, like not performance standard, but to a place where I'm kind of happy with it. But yeah, they're the two that really stick in my mind as pieces that I've worked very hard on.
Brilliant. I think, yeah, it's super important. I mean, I think we sometimes forget as teachers how important it is for the students to be inspired with what they're learning. Any final words of wisdom for us, Ben?
Um, yeah, on the subject of learning pieces, and have you had something that you've battled with? Um, I need to, yeah. I think if you have the mindset of a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, because there's two trains of thought, I think, when studying at university about where you can go. You can be the sort of person who goes in and walks past the practice rooms and hears the guy in there playing the, Liszt La Campanella or, the Mephisto Waltz or something, and you think, oh my God, I'm never going to be that good. There's no way I can even compete with that. Why am I even bothering? That's mindset A. And then there's mindset B, which is you go down the corridors and you hear the person playing the Mephisto Waltz and La Campanella. I think, wow, that's awesome. I'm going to practice until I can do that as well. And I think it's sort of the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. From a personal point of view, and Laura may back me up on this, I've always found that I was, certainly at university until my MA year, I was always somewhat lazy when it came to practicing because I was quite a good reader. So if I put a piece of music in front of me, if I could, chances are, if it wasn't beyond my physical capability, I could sight read it and normally do a pretty decent job. And it wasn't until sort of I got a rocket put under me towards halfway through my third year, going into my fourth year, that I thought, actually, yeah, there's some things I need to do some work. That's not the be all and end all to just be able to sight read stuff. To a point now where if I have something I really want to learn, I will take out. Normally, when I've got some time off from teaching, I'll sit down and I've got like a month where I've got a recital at the end, and I think, right, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to learn a new sonata, because you end up having loads and loads of stock repertoire that you need to take out and you polish and you spend a week on it and it's polished and it goes back up to the level it was very quickly. But you also want to keep things fresh. So I did Rhapsody in Blue 4 years ago for the first time, and then didn't touch it again until last month. So it was over the summer I started digging this out, and you look at things in a new way after you've had some time off from them. So I'm sort of waffling on. I've lost my train of thought slightly.
No, that's good.
Having a growth mindset, I think, is very important, but also from a repertoire point of view, put stuff away and come back to it. Say I did that with Rhapsody in Blue. I did that because I did the Mozart D minor concerto for my dissertation. I didn't get a chance to put it on a shelf because after my dissertation I then had to do it with an orchestra about 9 months later. And then after that gig was done, it did go on the shelf for about 4 years until last November when I did it again. But in the meanwhile, you get back on the horse. You put the concerto, you say, right, that concerto is done. I've done it now. I've done it with an orchestra. That's where I want to be with it. I'm really happy where I'm at the moment. Where do we go? Okay, let's learn the Leroy Anderson piano concerto. Let's learn Beethoven 4. So you do something else and you find something else and give yourself a new challenge. Always be having your mind what you want to learn, what sort of repertoire you want to do, what you want to perform, and its suitability for that. But don't neglect stuff. Don't just say, right, I've done that once, that's the end. Put it away by all means, and then come back to it and look at it afresh. And you find new ways to interpret it. You find you use different fingers. You'll have a different interpretation of a particular passage, and it's just great when you think, oh, did I really used to use my thumb on that note, or did I really used to go up on that passage or crescendo there? And you look back and think, well, that was really wrong with me. That was 19-year-old me thinking, oh, now I'm sophisticated and mature, so I'm going to do it in a different way. So, and it is important to do that. I think,
yeah, that's really good advice. So that growth mindset is we're gonna keep that in mind. And the word of the day with that is self-efficacy. It's
self-efficacy. Nice.
Yeah, it's I just wrote a book on that. Yay! Comes out on Friday. Hooray!
Nice.
But it's it's yes I can attitude, and that's important. So thank you very much to our guests. Thank you to Andrew and Pete, our students, and to our guest Ben for sharing your experience with us and your bits of your playing. And who knows, we may even see a bit of that Super Mario Brothers in print so that we can learn it too.
Yes, so must dig it out.
Brilliant. We'll hold you to that.
Absolutely.
So thanks very much. Any questions? Send us a tweet or an email, and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.